On NEA Report, a troubling death over the weekend of a man who was calling for medical assistance but ended up having the use of a taser and handcuffs, both being employed on him, and later dying on the way to the hospital. The family is furious about the statement that was issued to NEA Report by authorities. They're calling it a cover-up, and they're saying there were falsehoods in that statement. Meanwhile, an investigation into the death is underway, and we'll have more details on that have been reported. We're the first to report this story, and we'll have more information first right now on NEA Report. Today, it's a special report on the incident that took place and claimed the life of Israel Porterfield over the weekend in rural Craighead County. There's a lot to discuss with this. There's a lot that's happened since we've last updated the story, too. So I'm going to ask everybody to bear with us because we've got a lot of stuff to get through related to this, including a lot of new information, too. For those just catching up, this man who was in his home having a medical emergency over the weekend, 911 was called for a medical assistance call. An officer responded, a first responder who was also a Bay police officer, and an altercation ensued with this man in his home. It resulted in the man being stunned with the use of a taser, and also the man was handcuffed behind his back, we've been told. The man passed away, Israel, and his family is furious. And they're calling the statement that was issued by authorities to NEA Report over the weekend. They're saying that there are falsehoods in that statement, and they're calling it a cover-up. And so we're going to talk about what the family said. We're going to show you the statements from authorities. And we've also spoken to the sheriff who is investigating this case, and we're going to have more information on that from him. First, I want to show you exactly what the statement from authorities was. This came from Scott Ellington, but this was a source that I was able to reach out to just to contact law enforcement, and this is the version of events he was told by law enforcement. The Bay Volunteer Fire Department responded to Lunsford for a call of a person in distress. The first responder was a Bay police officer. When the subject in distress realized a Bay officer was in his home, he became agitated and an altercation ensued. The subject attempted to grab the officer's gun. The officer was able to secure his service weapon. While attempting to subdue the individual, the officer had to use his taser to dry stun the individual in an attempt to handcuff him. An ambulance arrived on the scene shortly thereafter. The individual went into cardiac arrest en route to the hospital. He was pronounced deceased shortly after arriving at the hospital. Now, that is the statement that's come out from the prosecutor. And that statement is the one the family is taking great issue with. As a matter of fact, the family is saying that this situation, this was not what happened. According to the family, they're saying that the man did not go for the gun. They're saying that he was handcuffed behind his back and then he was laid prone as his wife watched his hands turn white and tried to tell the officer, and she says the officer did not heed his warning. There's a lot of he said, she said in this, and from what I understand, there's not going to be any body camera footage either, because apparently the officer did not activate his body camera, thinking because it was a medical assistance call that he would not need to. And so that's going to make this even more complicated. There is so much to try to get through with this right now. So first, I want to tell you what the family says, because I spoke with his wife, Stacy Porterfield, yesterday morning, and she wants the public to know, well, her statement, quote, "I don't want my husband's name to be tarnished in any way. I want them to know he was trying to get medical assistance, and it didn't happen." And that's what she said. She said, and we'll take you through the day from what happened. She said Israel had come home Friday after picking up their daughter from school, but she knew something was wrong immediately. She said the daughter ran in, freaked out because apparently Israel had trouble driving on the way home. He walked in the door, she said, the wife, stiffened up and fell down. So she said she thought he was having a seizure. He had been hospitalized recently for AFib. He had an irregular heartbeat. And she said he was on heart medicine. So at this point in time, she makes contact with his father-in-law. And one of those two or both. I'm not entirely clear on that detail. Call 911. But I believe the father-in-law called 911. Her father-in-law, of course, Israel's father. Calls 911, and it's a medical assistance call. And at this time, they're saying whenever she turned around, he was not on the floor. He had apparently got up, moved back into the bedroom, and at this point in time, he had fallen or was laying face down again. So around then, the father arrived. They're trying to roll him over, but they said he kept trying to stand up. They're trying to keep him, from hurting himself and standing up, while they're also waiting for responders to get to Lunsford, a rural community in Craighead County. That's around the time they said the Bay police officer arrived. They said he put on his gloves, walked up the steps, and walked in, Stacy said. So the officer and the father, Ricky Porterfield, Israel's dad, they're trying to calm Israel down. They're trying to hold him down, but the indicators from everybody there were that he was struggling. And that could be for a variety of reasons. Obviously, nobody's trying to pass judgment on that. The man was not able to get oxygen. He was suffocating. And as any of us would do, that is a panic-inducing moment. So Stacy says the officer was like, she said, and this is kind of a subquote, if you do not be still, I'm going to tase you. My father-in-law, she said, told him, be still, but that's when the officer tased him. Now, to be clear, the officer used the drive stun setting on this taser. It's not much different than the tasing. It's just he didn't fire the prongs into him. And so the man was suddenly not fighting back anymore or struggling. Israel stopped struggling. Both handcuffs were placed on him. And the officer, I'm told by the wife, left him on his stomach with his hands restrained behind his back for 5 to 10 minutes while they waited on EMS to arrive. And we know that he was handcuffed until EMS arrived, according to the official statement. We just don't know the precise details, but according to the wife, those are the blanks filling in. She says as she's watching him, his hands turn white. She says, what's wrong with him? She said the officer responded, it's the cuffs. He's fine. But they finally roll him over. He wasn't breathing, she said. Now, both Stacy and Ricky told me 5 to 10 minutes passed before in their words, actual first responders arrived. During this time, they said the Bay officer never checked the man's pulse, never gave him CPR, left him on his stomach, left his hands restrained behind his back, and it wasn't until the EMTs arrived that he started to receive CPR and medical care. 5 to 10 minutes passed at some point where he had stopped breathing. Because when the hands turn white, that's when he stopped breathing. Probably a little bit before that. The blood was not flowing through his body. His blood was not getting the correct amount of oxygen or any. Here's where it gets more complicated. So the family, they watched him loaded into the ambulance and transported to a Jonesboro hospital. And while EMS tried to save his life, and I fully commend them for their work, because I know how hard this has been on them for multiple reasons, the man passed away. They couldn't save his life, and he was pronounced dead at the hospital, the prosecutor's statement said. The family was told there'd be an investigation into this, and we'll talk about that investigation more in just a minute. But first, what we have to talk about is something called positional asphyxia. And I know that's a boring term, but what this means is basically if somebody is handcuffed and they're left in a prone position, they are at a higher risk for an in-custody death. Now, I've got some research on this, and I want to share this with you because I spent most of the morning trying to find out and understand what type of training is employed to keep officers keep them informed about what could potentially end someone's life and them simply disregard it. Officers always hear somebody complaining if they're in handcuffs. That's common. So, of course, it's going to be easy to be cynical and ignore their complaints. The first thing that comes to mind when I think of ignoring the complaints is, I can't breathe. And we all know what that complaint was. And I'll even talk about that more here in a moment. But I first want to talk about positional asphyxiation. And I'm going to talk about this quickly and make it as hopefully something that most of us can follow along with as possible. You can do a Google search on this, by the way, if you want to. Easy Wikipedia articles about it. Postural asphyxia. It's a form of asphyxia when somebody in a position that's not natural, that position prevents them from breathing adequately. It can be a factor in death, or it can be a cause. And you'll notice the mention is within the summary. It's a factor for people who die suddenly in a hog-tied restraint by police, prison officers, military, or healthcare staff. He was not hog-tied, based on what we know, and I want to clarify that, because that would mean his hands were handcuffed behind his back and attached to feet also, which would have been secured. That would have arced the body up in a just absolutely impossible position, really, for just about any of us to be in. And that is something that officers are trained and told not to do, according to the National Law Enforcement Technology Center, which published in June of 1995, I might add, a piece on positional asphyxia sudden deaths. It was a bulletin drawn from a report that was prepared by the International Association of Chiefs of Police for the National Institute of Justice. This was not made by a journalist, a liberal fake news media, whatever you want to call us. This was made by the police because they wanted to do something about the deaths in custody that were taking place. Now, I can't read this entire study to you and plan on keeping even one or two of you interested. What I can tell you is there's risk factors. And you saw them on the screen just a moment ago. We'll put them back up there now. Those risk factors include three main things: obesity, heart issues, and an alcohol or drug usage. Two of those factors, I can tell you Israel Porterfield had. And I'm not being nasty about the obesity thing because I suffer from it too. But he was an overweight guy. He also had heart issues, which we know from the family. Alcohol, drugs, I don't know about that. The family says no, but that's when you have 2 out of 3 factors, you have to consider some of this. So it states advisory guidelines for care of subdued subjects follow extensive training and policy guidelines for involving physical restraint of subjects. In other words, make sure you have to restrain them before you do. It says as soon as in this law enforcement bulletin, as soon as the suspect is handcuffed, get him off of his stomach. Doesn't say please, by the way. It also says, be trained to recognize breathing difficulties. Ask the subject if he's used drugs or suffers cardiac or respiratory diseases. We know he suffered a cardiac issue because he was suffering it making the 911 call. It says monitor the subject carefully and obtain medical treatment if needed. Also, it says if the subject is turned over to a detention facility, inform the facility's custodians of medical conditions. But that did not happen because he was being handcuffed and restrained to receive medical care from EMTs. It's an extensive study or an extensive bulletin. But the gist of it is, and this is the I'm just going to read to you, NYPD's guidelines to prevent deaths in custody. 1995, they've only gotten more strict. As soon as the subject is handcuffed, get him off his stomach, turn him on his side, or place him in a seated position. If he continues to struggle, do not sit on his back. Hold the legs down or wrap his legs with a strap. Never tie the handcuffs to a leg or ankle restraint. If required, get the suspect immediate medical attention. Do not lay the person on his stomach. It says again, during transport to the station house or hospital, seated position. And an officer should sit next to him for observation and control. Now that is, well, I would assume NYPD is the largest police force in America. So they've seen more than just about all of the others combined. And in their mind, in their eyes, you should never leave a suspect on their stomach. What happens when you do leave a suspect on their stomach? Tragedy. If you do a Google search for breathing problems while handcuffed, one of the first articles that will show up is from the Training Institute on Strangulation Prevention. The article is Why Eric Garner Couldn't Breathe. In 2015, a case that took the nation, really, it was a horrible tragedy. where a man who was simply selling cigarettes outside of the law, Lucy's as they were called, was contacted by the police. He said 11 times, "I can't breathe," while they applied a chokehold to him, knelt on his back, pressed his face, mouth, nose to the pavement, handcuffed him, and ignored his pleas for oxygen. He said, "I can't breathe," at least 11 times. The New York Medical Examiner's Office, the Office of the City Medical Examiner, ruled his death a homicide. They said both, quote, compression of the neck, chokehold, and compression of the chest and prone positioning during physical restraint by police, unquote, led to that. But contrary to popular belief, as the article points out, it wasn't just the chokehold. Many people think the chokehold was responsible, and the officer that applied it was actually something else. That chokehold was one element, but the other was the prone positioning and the compression of the chest with the weight on the man's back. Both of those practices had been banned in 1993 by the NYPD. They were banned because they were causing people to die. Positional asphyxia is caused by compression of chest and prone positioning. Just by itself, according to this article, placing a suspect face down with just handcuffs behind his back, much less hogtied, that has caused, it says, untold in-custody deaths by suffocation, and is therefore prohibited by many police departments, including the NYPD. It says, but you add to that when officers kneel or push on the restrained person's back, which happened with Garner. I don't know, don't have the details that happened here. I don't have confirmation or the ability to rule it out. But that increases the dangers. If the suspect's been pepper sprayed, intoxicated, medical conditions such as obesity or heart problems, the danger goes through the roof. You do not handcuff and leave prone a large man with heart problems, especially when it's not even a criminal call. But that's what happened. And so now you have a fatal combination. He already had issues. He was having trouble breathing, and he may have been in a cardiac event. The situation was not made better and could only have been made worse by placing him in a prone position with his hands cuffed behind his back. That makes it more difficult to breathe, on top of everything else, to the point that it's been responsible for at least some cases of homicide. According to Dr. Michael Biden, the former New York City chief medical examiner, he investigated the Garner case, but beyond that, he's one of the most renowned experts in this field in the world. Quote, obese people, especially lying face down, prone, or unable to breathe when enough pressure is put on their back. The pressure prevents the diaphragm from going up and down, and he can't inhale or exhale. Unquote. Officers had said in that case, in the Garner case, that the chokehold was not applied to the windpipe. They did not, they said, crush his windpipe. What happened was that struggle put this obese man out of breath. He's already gasping for air. They pull his hands behind his back. What does that do? Pulls your chest apart, right? Just flex your chest out right now and take a few breaths. Put your chest out as hard as you can while you're listening to me and start breathing. Do you feel how hard that is to do? Just while you're standing up. If you pull your elbows and almost try to touch your elbows together. Add to the fact that he was on his stomach. Add to the fact that he had a heart issue and was having some type of what appears to be a cardiac event. It's going to have to be officially announced by the autopsy results of what the cause was, or what the cardiac event or other that he experienced was. But it appears to have been that. This did not make things better. This actually would have intensified the situation and made it much worse. And I'm not reporting this to try to pass judgment on the officer, because there will be an investigation into this. I don't have the officer's name yet, or haven't reported it at least yet, of the person, responsible in that position. But what I can tell you is it is being investigated. The problem is that the family said, Stacy specifically told me, that she was told that it was being ruled as a natural cause, she said. She was told that this weekend, according to what she told me. Sheriff Boyd reached out today, and he gave me some more information. He said he wanted to dispel a rumor, and this is what his statement actually says. He says, we are investigating it. I know there's a rumor out there that we're investigating it as a natural cause. I want to tell you, we don't investigate cases of natural cause deaths. We're investigating it to determine the cause of death. That's why we sent the body to the Arkansas State Crime Lab. We want to know as much as the family does with what happened. That's why we did go ahead and send for an autopsy to the crime lab. It's an ongoing investigation right now. That's the statement that was issued to me by the Craighead County Sheriff. His agency is investigating this. Okay? And so just while I was speaking to him, I asked him what he knew about positional asphyxiation. And we just discussed that, briefly for a few moments. But he said law enforcement is aware of asphyxiation risks. And he said, personally, I've never dealt with an incident like that. He said, I've read about it, and I do know about it. And he also said, what we do, how law enforcement's trained, is once you take someone into custody and they're handcuffed, you place them in the car, you put your rearview mirror on them, you keep them under your watch at all times because you're responsible for them. And so when I said earlier, the Bay officer responsible, what I mean is that officer was responsible once he placed Israel Porterfield in handcuffs. He was responsible for his life. And if the wife, if her statement is correct, and I'm not saying it isn't, a lot happens, a lot of emotions and a lot of confusion, but if what she said is correct, and he was left on his stomach as his hands turned white, with his handcuffs hands cuffed behind his back. He was dying there, right there. And CPR, could it have saved his life? We don't know. It's probably unfair to the family to speculate too far onto that point. But it appears like several missteps were taken. The sheriff says he hopes that the preliminary autopsy results are made available by the end of this week. But he also said that it may be 6 months before any type of toxicology results are known. Authorities want to know if there was something that could have also influenced his heart rate that he was taking, be it prescribed or else. The sheriff did mention the case being investigated. In fact, he reassured me and insistently stated that the cause of death had not been determined. He said that they will determine it once the autopsy is complete, but it's an ongoing investigation right now. But for those of you who read the story, and of course for the wife, a now widow of Israel Porterfield, those words are clashing a little bit with what she said she heard when she was told that it's going to be ruled natural cause death, she said. But again, the grieving process that she's going through and the family's going through, hopefully that was a misunderstanding. The problem is that we've seen cases before where an investigation may be said to be ongoing, but the results, they've already been decided. And we hope that's not what's happening here. And we're going to keep following it, obviously, closely as could be, to find answers, if they are something that are discoverable. Horrible tragedy for this community and for the family and for the paramedics of the area, too. I've seen a lot of people commenting on this online. And I know emotions are supercharged with a subject like this. Let's try to be logical. Let's try to reserve judgment. I know people think and they want to make their opinions known. And sometimes they're against whether it's an individual, whether it's an officer. If they were mistakes, nothing indicates they were intentional. Nothing indicates somebody went in there and tried to hurt him. And so I ask that even if there were, and we're not there yet, it does appear like there was a couple of things that should not have been done, but if there's a determination of negligence in this at some point, I still want to urge compassion from all of our viewers and listeners, because it's going to hurt for everybody, family especially. But that can be made worse by people that are hateful online, to either side. More understanding, more compassion, more empathy is never going to be the wrong answer. I promise you in life. I've learned every time that I open my mouth and I'm not being empathetic, I get in trouble usually from someone. So hopefully all of us out there can consider that. And we have to consider, this has got to be tough for the officer too. This reporting even has got to be tough. It's not designed to be hard on him or anybody. It's just designed to find answers and to find the truth. The family wants to know what happened. They want an independent, reporter, source, to try to find those answers, and that's what we're here for. We hope that we've helped to at least further the conversation. If all we've done is raise more awareness about what is obviously something that law enforcers need to know about, this positional asphyxia, that is something that we've got to keep people aware of, if nothing else. And hopefully we'll find out more about this case. It is a tragedy, and our hearts, our deepest condolences and sympathies are with the family and friends right now of Israel Porterfield.